I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Nothing I'm about to say has been reviewed or approved by my agency, the federal government, or any other agency, and the reason is, even I don't know what I'm about to say. I think we have an election. The election campaign is already on, and it's only October of 1999. It's an entire, more than a year until the actual election will be on. It's months and months away before the first actual caucus or primary. That won't be until late January for the Iowa caucus and early February for the New Hampshire primary. And I think, at least in the Democratic Party, we're going to have a fight in the primaries all the way through. I don't think it'll be settled right at the beginning. So we're actually going to have a race. There's going to be some real politics that's going to go on for many, many, many months. And the two guys that are going to be fighting it out are Al Gore, the sitting vice president of the United States, and an ex-senator named Bill Bradley, who was a NBA basketball star. He's also a Rhodes Scholar, a senator from New Jersey for about 15, 18 years, and a very, very intelligent and bright guy, and not the kind of guy that you or Gore should underestimate. What is he for? Well, for good or ill, and I'm not sure it's good, he really seems to be an old-fashioned liberal, but one that has his money tight in his fist. So he's a liberal who's for a balanced budget. But he's come out, Bradley's come out this last week with a new health care plan. And in the new health care plan, he's going to basically increase or decrease the number of people that are uninsured and try to insure everybody. Now, there's been a number of attempts at that, including the famous Clinton health plan, which was a complete disaster politically and was destroyed by the ads that were put out by the healthcare industry. So is that going to hurt him? Maybe not. It all depends on where the Democrats are at, because at least for the first 6 months, Bradley has to attract the votes of Democrats. He doesn't have to attract the votes of independents or the votes of moderate Republicans. He has to do that in the general election. And is he capable of doing that? Well, right now he's virtually running neck and neck with Gore in the states where they know who Bradley is. States like New Hampshire, where Bradley's been running. And so Bradley's not only catching up, he's catching up very, very quickly. And this has become a real incident and a real change in what everybody expected. Everybody expected a very, very strong race with a lot of opponents. I'm busy adjusting my shirt here. In the Republican race, and for the Democratic race to come out and be a shoo-in, slam dunk for the sitting vice president of the United States. A vice president who was loyal to his boss, a vice president who's raised a lot of money for Democrats around the country, a vice president who campaigned a lot during the 1998 congressional race when they, at least in the House, the Democrats almost caught up to the Republicans. So he has a lot of chits to come in, and you'd think that Democrats throughout the country would be supporting him with lots and lots of money. But the fact of the matter is, even though Bradley has raised less money than Gore, Bradley has more in the bank than Al Gore does. And neither of them have 1/5 the cash in the bank that George W. Bush has. So the Republicans are going to have this tremendous amount of money. But Al Gore doesn't even have an advantage over his only rival. Well, why is Bradley Al Gore's only rival? Well, the main reason is all the other Democrats who were talking about getting the race were scared out by Al Gore. So Kerry didn't run. There were a number of Democrats that were thinking about it, and they all backed out before the race even started, except for Bill Bradley. Because Bill Bradley saw Gore as being the kind of guy who's just not going to win. And I believe it. I agree. I think he's a choker. There's something about Gore's manner. There's something about his lack of charisma. There's something about the way he doesn't relate to an audience. There's something about the way he doesn't relate to television that really makes people think, or it makes people turn off and not really relate to Al Gore. Bill Bradley, on the other hand, has been around for a long time. He's very, very comfortable on TV, although he kind of gives this impression of being this big, tall, jockey, kind of down-home, nerdy intellectual. So he kind of relates to Clinton a little bit, except that unlike Clinton, he doesn't play around with women. He doesn't seem to have a lot of scandals. If he did, and especially in New Jersey where he was a senator, a lot of these scandals would be coming to light. And I'm sure that they're looking for scandals from Bill Bradley, especially the Republicans, because I think deep down they're afraid that they might be running against Bill Bradley. And as running against Bill Bradley, they're going to be running against a guy who actually is pretty sharp, who knows a lot, another Rhodes Scholar just like Bill Clinton, and a guy who gives off this impression of caring about people. Now, can we afford right at this stage in the game to have a health care plan that covers every single person in the United States? I don't know. Will this bust the budget and destroy the surplus? I don't know. Those are things that we're going to see in the next couple of weeks. People are going to start evaluating this new health care plan. I'm going to be taking a look at the new health care plan and to see if there are weaknesses in it or to see if it's even financeable. But what he wants to finance it with is to take the money that's in Medicaid, which is not that successful a program. Not everybody who qualifies for Medicaid are putting their kids into Medicaid, even some of the working poor, and taking that money, which is about $40–50 billion a year, and expanding that into a completely different plan that will cover all the uninsured in conjunction with employer health plans, in conjunction with HMOs, in conjunction with what we call the Federal Employee Health Benefit, FEHB. And that, I have to admit, I am personally against, is taking the Federal Employee Health Benefit and bringing any other people into it. Why? Because right now the FEHB covers the federal workers. It's a pretty good plan, and it works this way, a lot like the Clinton health plan, unfortunately. Basically, what the FEHB does is it says to the insurance companies, you insure our people, but you put a set of benefits together, and we'll tell you what the standard benefits are. And then you price them, and you put that forward before the federal employee. Federal employee, the government pays like about 60%, the federal employee pays 40, it could be 65–35, I don't know the percents. So the employee it is costing him money. So when he gets his set of plans, one plan has this set of benefits, always has the minimum set of benefits for $140 a month out of your pocket. Another plan may have $200 a month out of your pocket and has more benefits or is structured a different way. If you don't, some are HMOs, others are not, some are fee for service. It all depends on which one you pick. But when you pick one, you know how much it costs and you know what it's covering. No cherry picking. They can't pick out any federal worker. They can't pick in any federal worker. And of course, the insurance industry hates that. They hate not being allowed to cherry pick out the unhealthy people and cherry pick in the healthy people in order to get their average cost per person down. That's the whole idea of health insurance, and that's going to be one of the big problems in health insurance in the future as we get to the human genome, which is being researched right now, and eventually they'll be able to say, we can take a drop of your blood or a drop of your baby's blood and predict within a couple percent or maybe even 0.5% exactly what the lifetime health care cost of this baby is going to be. Once they're able to do that, there's no such thing as insurance. There's no risk sharing. Insurance is risk sharing. So basically what Bradley's talking about is taking a big load of people and putting it into the Federal Employee Health Benefit. Now what that'll do is that'll change the whole nature of the risk sharing in the Federal Employee Health Benefit and bring in a lot of people that may have different sets of diseases, that may have different costs, and I think it would, of course, increase the cost of the FEHB for the people it's intended to cover. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't create another FEHB for the uninsured, and that's basically what Clinton was trying to do, because the FEHB has a board, and the board decides what are the basic health plans and what are the basic benefits that everybody has to offer. The insurance industry, especially the smaller insurers, fought that Clinton health plan left and right, even though it was going to guarantee the entire population of America as a captive market for the insurance companies that had the plans. Why? Because they couldn't cherry pick. If you offered a plan, anybody who opted into it, you'd have to take them. And that's basically the bottom line of how these FEHB-like plans work. I'm hoping, and I haven't seen very much, that Bradley's plan will start getting publicized so I can see what it is and see what he's talking about doing. Is it like the Hillary Clinton plan? Is it something different? Is it just taking Medicaid and expanding it to the uninsured? I don't know. But what we have found out is the ranks of the uninsured have gone up by about 800,000 people the last 2 years. And the percentage of uninsured has gone up. And even more bizarre, 1 million people with incomes over 50,000 are uninsured where they weren't before. How is that happening? I think a lot of people are taking a job and opting for a situation where for more salary, they'll forego the benefit. Now, whether that's going to work out and whether that difference is going to be more or less than private insurance, that's hard to say. But a lot of people are doing that in this very, very good economy. So I'm not sure that this increase in the uninsured is really a problem or really just appears to be a problem. But that's something that'll come out too. But that is so far one of the few things that Bradley's come out with that he's actually proposed. And we'll see what he proposes more or how this new entitlement is going to affect the budget deficit. And I hope it doesn't create a deficit or take our surplus and turn it into a deficit. So that's the next thing about Bradley. Now, Bradley could very, very easily sweep aside Gore as people see that Gore's polls are going down or that they stay down. Usually, Bradley has been running very, very consistently 10 to 15 points behind George W. Bush. In the states that Bradley has been running on, and that where they know about Bradley, Bradley's been only running 5 to 10% behind George W. Bush and is catching up to George W. Bush in those areas. So Bradley could very, very easily be a threat to George W. Bush, where unless something changes drastically, Al Gore is going to be a pushover. I mean, George W. Bush isn't even going to realize that he has opposition unless Al Gore gets a lot more popular than he's been so far. And I personally don't think that's going to happen. Meanwhile, what else has happened? Dan Quayle got out of the race a week ago. Buchanan is thinking of leaving the Republican Party. John McCain, the senator from Arizona, the anti-buy-your candidate, federal spending candidate in the Republican Party, basically is saying to Buchanan, don't let the door hit you on your way out. And Buchanan's come out with a book that basically says that Adolf Hitler was not a threat. All these things are happening. Meanwhile, there seems to be a real power struggle coming up in America's third party. Now, remember, every time a third party gets more than 5% of the vote, they qualify the next time around for matching federal funds. So if Buchanan gets to be the Reform Party candidate, he gets to play with $12 million of federal money plus whatever he can raise, which is a lot of money. And his plan basically is to win the Reform Party nomination, pick up 12, 13, maybe as much as 15 or 16% of the vote, and then go into an ace and beat out the other two candidates in the debates to the point where he's humiliated his opponents in the debates. He basically won the debates, and then if he can get 33.5%, he wins the election. Is that going to happen? I doubt it, and I hope not. but it could. That's his plan. That's his thought pattern. Now, the interesting thing about Buchanan is that Buchanan is being backed by Ross Perot. Is Ross Perot endorsed him officially? No. Has he met with Ross Perot's people? Yes. He's even met with left-wingers who joined the Reform Party in New York, like Lenore Fulani, a member of very, very left-wing Labor Alliance or something like that party in New York. Strange bedfellows? Yes. And that's going to make this even more interesting. Meanwhile, Jesse Ventura is trying to keep a warm seat in the Reform Party this particular time, trying to get somebody in there who can get more than 5%, so that when he runs for president in 2004, Jesse Ventura can run as the Reform Party candidate. And he thinks that he can do nationally what he's done in Minnesota. But he needs to prove himself in Minnesota first, so he can't run this time around. So he's trying to put his candidate into that position. Now, originally he was talking about Lowell Weicker, who's an ex-governor of Connecticut, who used to be a Republican, then he was an independent. Now he might be a Reform Party. He's been going the gamut. But now he's talking about putting in Donald Trump. So we have this fight in the Reform Party between two very, very articulate, outgoing, telegenic potential candidates who are both eccentric in their own way. One is an eccentric billionaire, Donald Trump, who also has the resources to self-finance his candidacy in order to try to get up to that 5%. Same basic scenario that Ross Perot had. Ross Perot had his own money, and you can spend as much of your own money without any restraints because of the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court has said that. And then we have this other alternative, which is this right-wing candidate, social conservative, but at the same time populist. And what is a populist? Well, back in the 1890s, a populist was a guy who was against outside influences in America. It's against America being a great power in the world, basically against any involvement in America and Europe or anywhere else. And he was also believed in very, very high tariffs and protectionist policies and no free trade. And also populists historically, at least the populists in the 1890 when they first started, were for a very, very inflationary, expansionist policy, monetary policy. In other words, they were the free silver rights. They wanted basically to print money and make money cheaper so that people could pay off their loans with less than they otherwise had. The odd thing about Buchanan is following almost all the policies of the 1890s populists. Against foreigners, against immigration, very, very nativist. There's a fact, I mean, he hasn't made any bones about not liking Jews very much. Buchanan, against free trade, for high tariffs, for the, quote, working man, trying to protect the working man's job, against exports, against any involvement whatsoever in the rest of the world, basically reducing the military and bringing all the boys home everywhere. And that's basically Buchanan's position. Do I agree with it? I'm against almost everything Buchanan stands for, and I'm not afraid to say it. However, there's no doubt about it. Buchanan is an excellent television candidate and an excellent television host. And that's basically what he's been ever since I believe he was in the Nixon administration, maybe in the Ronald Reagan administration too, with minor little jobs, speechwriter here, publicist there. Nobody really very important in either administration. But once he got out in the world, he was hired by CNN to be on the right in Crossfire. Very, very articulate, very, very telegenic, really knows how to manipulate the media and really knows how to get himself on camera. Knows how to say very extreme things in a very attractive way. And that's basically where Buchanan is at. And he's been able to hone this craft. year after year after year on Crossfire. And let's face it, as one commentator said, if he doesn't get elected, his seat on Crossfire and his very, very high salary is guaranteed so that he can warm it and practice for the next election. So he's always out there. He's like the Pat Paulson of the 90s, except that he has a lot of actual pretty extremist positions on a lot of various things. Is he going to get anywhere? Well, basically, and what's gone on so far is the Republicans have basically rejected him this time around. He hasn't gotten anywhere. He hasn't raised much money. The Christian Coalition isn't even supporting him. Pat Robertson gave him the cold shoulder in the Christian Coalition meeting. In every way but an outright endorsement, Pat Robertson virtually endorsed George W. Bush for president and encouraged his people to follow George W. Bush, even though George W. Bush didn't say the right things before the Christian Coalition meeting about school vouchers and school prayers and abortion and all these other things. He just gave his standard speech, barely even mentioned it, and Pat Robertson gushed all over him. So Buchanan is feeling like he doesn't have that influence. He can't play that spoiler. He can't go in there and win some of those primaries. Nobody's giving him a lot of money, and yet he sees in the Reform Party this $12 million pile of federal money sitting there, guaranteed from the last election because the Reform Party got more than 5%, just for him to spend as he sees fit if he can gain that Reform Party nomination. One of the problems, though, if he does that and he switches to the Reform Party for the election purposes, he may not be welcome back as a Republican when he's done. And I suspect he won't be welcome back, especially if he does run for the Reform Party, he does get 6-7% of the vote, and George W. loses a close election against maybe Bill Bradley. People will blame Buchanan for that, and Buchanan would be hard-pressed to even call himself on the right in a situation. They might just get a Republican and a Democrat and block out Buchanan because Buchanan won't be the Republican voice anymore. And that's how CNN works. That's how Crossfire works. You got your Democrat on the left, your Republican on the right, and what's going to happen when the guy on the right is not a Republican anymore. And the Republicans are really ostracizing him. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's a scenario that could happen in this next year. So basically, it's wide open. There's a real race on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, it's wide closed. And even though you have George W. Bush, he hasn't faltered yet. He's raising a lot of money. He hasn't made any horrible gaffes. There was a little thing about that he might have taken cocaine in his youth, and he seems to have finessed that particular situation. And he's played it clever. He's played it low-key. He's played it very compassionate. He's a pleasant person who looks like he can win. And the Republicans seem to be uniting around him. Meanwhile, we have McCain. He's the maverick on the campaign finance side. And then on the right, we got Gary Bauer, who couldn't even get the Christian Coalition behind him. He's the social conservative. And Quayle is out now. And there's some other guys, Alan Keyes and a few others, that really don't need much mention because they're not really worth mentioning. And so that's the situation. The Republicans seem to be coalescing around, behind their man. The Democrats seem to be separating and falling off from support of a sitting vice president. We may have a sitting vice president who's actually ousted from the Democratic candidacy for president. That would be a very, very interesting situation, and there's a lot of scenarios where that could happen. My name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. Reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Thank you very much for watching.